The distant rumble of thunder matched the storm in Catherine Walker's heart as she stood amid the smoking ruins of what had once been her family home. Montana Territory, 1876, a place where dreams could be built and shattered with equal ferocity. The smell of ash clung to her clothes and hair as she sank to her knees, her fingers digging into the scorched earth where her father's ranch house had stood just yesterday. "Miss, are you all right?" The voice came from behind her, deep and gentle despite its obvious strength. Catherine turned, eyes red-rimmed but dry. She had no tears left after the night of weeping. A man sat atop a chestnut stallion, silhouetted against the morning sky. His broad shoulders and the worn leather of his riding gear marked him as one who made his living in the saddle. "Do I look all right to you, sir?" Her voice cracked with bitterness. He dismounted in one fluid motion, removing his hat as he approached. His face was weathered by sun and wind, but his eyes were kind beneath the brim of his Stetson. He couldn't have been more than 30, with sandy hair that curled slightly at his collar. "Ethan Everett," he offered, extending a hand she didn't take. "I saw the smoke from miles back. Thought someone might need help." Catherine stood, brushing ash from her skirt with trembling hands. "You're too late for that, Mr. Everett." His eyes surveyed the destruction-blackened timbers, melted glass, the skeleton of what had been a modest but comfortable home. "Raiders, the Blackwood Gang," she replied, spitting the name like poison. "They came at nightfall, my father. He refused to sell our water rights to their boss." Her voice faltered. "They shot him first, then my brother when he tried to fight back. I only escaped because I was at the creek washing linens." The man's jaw tightened. "The Blackwoods are a plague on this territory. Sheriff Tanner's been trying to bring them in for months. They burned everything," she whispered, finally meeting his gaze fully. "They burned my home." Something in her broken voice seemed to reach deep inside him. Ethan Everett stood straighter, his eyes taking on a determined glint. "Then I'll build you one of stone," he said with quiet certainty. "When they can't burn." Catherine blinked, startled by the unexpected vow from a complete stranger. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," he replied. "No one deserves this. I've got a small spread about 3 miles east. You'll need somewhere to stay while we sort this out." She almost laughed, the sound harsh even to her own ears. "Mr. Everett, I appreciate your kindness, but my father and brother are dead. I have no family left, no money, and no home. There is no we in this situation." "There is now," he said simply, with the quiet confidence of a man used to facing down challenges. "Miss Walker, Catherine Walker. Miss Walker, I won't pretend to know your pain, but I do know something about rebuilding after loss, and I know no one should face it alone." He glanced at the sky, noting the gathering clouds. "A storm's coming. We should gather whatever can be salvaged and get you to shelter." Catherine wanted to refuse, to send this presumptuous stranger away, but reality pressed in upon her. She had nowhere to go, nothing but the clothes she wore and the locket around her neck containing a small portrait of her mother, long dead. "Why would you help me?" she asked, suspicion coloring her tone. Ethan's expression softened. "My father taught me that a man's worth is measured by what he does when no one's watching, and what he gives when there's nothing to gain." He gestured to the ruins. "Let me help you, Miss Walker, at least until you decide what comes next." Something about his straightforward manner broke through her defensive shell. Catherine nodded once, then turned to the ruins of her home. "There might be some things in my father's strongbox if it survived the fire. It was under the floorboards in his study." They worked together as the first raindrops began to fall, sifting through charred remains. The strongbox, made of heavy iron, had indeed survived. Inside were her father's pocket watch, a small pouch of gold coins, and land deeds that confirmed her inheritance of the property 320 acres of prime Montana grassland with reliable water access. Now she understood why the Blackwoods had wanted it so badly. As the rain intensified, Ethan led her to his horse. "Hold these," he instructed, handing her the salvaged treasures wrapped in his bandana. With gentle but firm hands, he lifted her onto the saddle before swinging up behind her. The ride to Ethan's ranch was conducted mostly in silence. The steady rhythm of the horse's gait and the drumming of rain on their hats filling the space where conversation might have been. Catherine sat stiffly at first, uncomfortable with the stranger's proximity, but as fatigue overtook her, she found herself leaning back against his solid chest. Ethan's small spread turned out to be a modest but well-maintained ranch house with a barn and corral. A bunkhouse stood empty. He explained that he currently ran the operation alone, having only recently purchased it from a retiring rancher. "It's not much," he said as he helped her dismount, "but it's dry and warm." Inside, the house was simple but clean. A main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area, and 2 bedrooms off to the side. Ethan quickly built a fire while Catherine stood dripping on the worn wooden floor, suddenly aware of her disheveled state. "The bedroom on the right is yours," he said, not looking up from his task. "There are clean clothes in the chest. They belonged to Mrs. Hollister, the previous owner's wife. She was about your size, I reckon." "Mr. Everett," Catherine began. "Ethan, please." "Ethan," she amended, "your kindness is overwhelming, but I can't simply move into your home. It wouldn't be proper." He stood, dusting his hands on his pants. "Miss Walker, with all due respect to propriety, you have nowhere else to go tonight. Tomorrow we can ride into Jefferson and speak with Sheriff Tanner. Perhaps there's a widow in town who needs boarders. But tonight you'll stay here where it's safe and dry." His tone brooked no argument. "I'll sleep in the barn." Before she could protest further, he grabbed a blanket from the back of a chair. "There's food in the pantry. Help yourself. I'll see to the horse." Left alone, Catherine finally let the full weight of the day's events settle on her shoulders. Her father and brother were gone, their home destroyed, and now she was dependent on the charity of a man she'd just met. Tears welled up again, but she forced them back. There would be time to mourn properly once she had a plan. She found the promised clothes simple but well-made dresses, undergarments, and even a nightgown. After changing and hanging her damp clothes by the fire, Catherine explored the kitchen, finding bread, cheese, and dried beef. She made a simple meal and left a portion for Ethan. When he returned, hair damp from the rain, he seemed surprised by the waiting food. "Thank you," he said, removing his wet coat and hanging it by the door. "You didn't need to do that." "It seems only fair, given your hospitality," she replied, seated in a chair by the fire. "Mr. Everett, Ethan, I've been thinking. I can't impose on you, but I also can't simply abandon my family's land." He sat across from her, stretching his long legs toward the hearth. "What are you considering?" "I need to rebuild somehow." Her fingers twisted in her lap. "The Blackwoods will be back once they realize I survived. They won't give up until they have our water rights." Ethan's expression hardened. "They're not getting anything, not if I have any say in it." He took a bite of the food she'd prepared. "First thing tomorrow, we'll report what happened to Sheriff Tanner. The Blackwoods have been growing bolder, but murder and arson might finally be enough to get a posse formed." "And if it isn't?" Catherine asked quietly. "Sheriff Tanner hasn't exactly been effective so far." "Then we find another way," Ethan replied simply. "But tonight, you need rest. Tomorrow will bring enough troubles of its own." Catherine studied him in the firelight, this stranger who had offered help without hesitation. "Why are you doing this?" Truly, Ethan was quiet for a long moment. 5 years ago, I lost everything in a fire too. Different circumstances, lightning strike during a drought. My parents, our home, most of our herd. His eyes met hers, reflecting the dancing flames. A neighbor took me in, helped me get back on my feet. I swore if I ever had the chance to do the same for someone else, I would. The simple honesty of his answer touched something in Catherine's heart. I'm sorry for your loss. As I am for yours, he replied. Get some sleep, Miss Walker. Dawn comes early. Catherine, she offered. If I'm to call you Ethan, then you should call me Catherine. A small smile touched his lips. Good night then, Catherine. Good night, Ethan. Morning brought with it clear skies and the realization that Catherine's world had irrevocably changed. She woke disoriented, the unfamiliar room confusing her until memory crashed back like a physical blow. For several minutes, she lay motionless under the borrowed quilt, gathering her strength for the day ahead. When she finally emerged from the bedroom, she found Ethan already awake, frying bacon on the cook stove. The domestic, seen this tall, capable man turning bacon with practiced ease, struck her as incongruously normal amid her shattered life. Good morning, he said, glancing over his shoulder. Hope you're hungry. I could eat, she admitted, though food was the last thing on her mind. She moved to help, setting the small table with plates and cutlery she found in a cupboard. Over breakfast, Ethan outlined his plan. They would ride into Jefferson, report the attack to Sheriff Tanner, and then visit the mercantile to get supplies Catherine would need. He spoke matter-of-factly, as though helping a woman reclaim her burned homestead was an everyday occurrence. I have some money, Catherine said, thinking of her father's gold coins. I can pay for supplies. We'll worry about that later, Ethan replied. For now, let's focus on getting justice for your family. Jefferson was a growing town of about 500 souls, serving the surrounding ranches and farms. As they rode down the main street, Catherine, now wearing one of Mrs. Hollister's dresses and riding a gentle mare, Ethan kept as a spare mount heads turned. Jefferson wasn't so large that a stranger wouldn't be noticed, especially one riding alongside Ethan Everett. The sheriff's office was a square building of weathered wood with barred windows. Inside, Sheriff Tanner, a man in his 50s with a salt and pepper mustache and weary eyes, listened to Catherine's account with increasing gravity. The Blackwoods have gone too far this time, he said when she finished. Murder's a hanging offense, even in Montana territory. Will you form a posse? Ethan asked, standing with his hat in his hands, his posture respectful but somehow challenging. Tanner sighed. I'll try, Everett, but you know how it is. The Blackwoods have 20 men riding with them. Most folks around here are too scared to stand against them. 2 men are dead, Catherine said, her voice stronger than she felt. My father and brother were respected in this community. Surely that counts for something. It does, Miss Walker, and you have my deepest condolences. I knew your father, he was a good man. The sheriff leaned back in his chair. I'll send telegrams to the territorial marshal. This might be enough to get federal help. And in the meantime, Ethan pressed, Miss Walker's homestead is unprotected. I can spare a deputy to ride out there occasionally, but that's all. Tanner looked genuinely regretful. Unless you've got another suggestion. I do, Ethan said, his decision apparently made on the spot. I'm going to help Miss Walker rebuild, starting today. Catherine turned to him in surprise. Ethan, you've already done more than I meant what I said yesterday, he interrupted gently. A house of stone, one they can't burn. Sheriff Tanner studied them both with interest. That's mighty generous, Everett, but what about your own place? It'll keep, Ethan replied simply. Sheriff, we both know the Blackwoods won't stop. They want that water, and they'll be back once they realize Catherine survived. You're probably right, Tanner admitted. Well, if you're determined to rebuild out there, I suggest you don't do it alone. The Blackwoods won't take kindly to interference. After leaving the sheriff's office, they visited the mercantile, where Ethan ordered lumber, tools, and supplies to be delivered to Catherine's property the following day. Despite her protests, he insisted on paying for most of it. "Consider it an investment," he said when she objected. "You can repay me when your ranch is profitable again." His confidence that she could restore her father's ranch to prosperity was both touching and daunting. As they left the store, Catherine caught him looking at the gunsmith's shop across the street. "What is it?" she asked. "Just thinking you might need protection," he replied. "Can you shoot?" "My father taught me," she said. "We had a rifle and a shotgun, but they were lost in the fire." Ethan nodded decisively and led her to the gunsmith's. 30 minutes later, they emerged with a Winchester rifle and a Smith & Wesson revolver, both sized appropriately for Catherine's smaller frame. "I don't expect you to become a gunslinger," Ethan explained as they mounted their horses, "but out here, being able to defend yourself isn't optional." They were about to leave town when a voice called out, "Everett, hold up!" A man approached on horseback, tall and lean, with dark hair and intense eyes. He wore a marshal's badge on his vest. "Marshal Collins," Ethan greeted him. "What brings you to Jefferson?" "Heard about the Walker place," Collins replied, his gaze shifting to Catherine. "Miss Walker, I presume?" "I'm U.S. Marshal Daniel Collins. I'm sorry for your loss." Catherine nodded her thanks, studying this new arrival with interest. "Tanner sent word yesterday when a neighbor reported seeing smoke," Collins continued. "I've been tracking the Blackwoods for months. This might be the break we need to bring them to justice." "You know where they are?" Ethan asked. Collins shook his head. "They're holed up somewhere in the mountains, but they come down to cause trouble regularly. Word is they've got their eyes on several properties with good water access." He looked at Catherine. "Your father's place being one of them." "They murdered my family for water rights," Catherine said, the words still unreal to her ears. "And they'll answer for it," Collins promised. "I'm gathering men I can trust. We'll find them." "I'd like to help," Ethan offered. Collins considered him. "You were Army, weren't you?" "Before settling here, cavalry, mustered out 3 years ago." "Good. I could use a man who knows how to follow orders." The marshal glanced at Catherine. "What are your plans, Miss Walker?" "She's staying at my place for now," Ethan answered before she could speak. "We're going to rebuild her home, one they can't burn next time." Catherine found her voice. "A house of stone," she elaborated, looking at Ethan with new appreciation for his determination. Collins nodded. "Smart. The territory's changing, but not fast enough. We still need to be our own first line of defense." He touched the brim of his hat. "I'll be in touch, Everett." "Miss Walker, again, my condolences." As they rode out of town, Catherine found herself studying Ethan's profile. "You were in the Army," he nodded. 7th Cavalry. Served 6 years, mostly keeping peace between settlers and Indians. A shadow crossed his face. Not always proud of how that was accomplished. Catherine sensed there was more to that story but didn't press. Instead, she asked, "Do you really think we can build a stone house?" "I do," he replied with quiet confidence. "There's good limestone in these parts. It'll take time and hard work, but it can be done." "We," she repeated. "You keep saying we, but this isn't your fight, Ethan." He reined his horse to a stop, turning to face her fully. "Catherine, in places like this, we have to stand together. If the Blackwoods can burn out your family and get away with it, none of us are safe." His eyes held hers steadily. "Besides, I gave my word." Something warm unfurled in her chest at his simple declaration. In a world suddenly turned upside down, his steadfastness was a beacon she couldn't help but be drawn to. "Then I thank you," she said softly, "and I promise I won't forget this kindness." His smile was brief but genuine. Let's get back to the ranch. Tomorrow we start rebuilding." True to his word, Ethan rode with Catherine to her property the next morning. The delivery wagon from the mercantile arrived shortly after, bringing the first load of supplies. For a temporary shelter, Ethan proposed building a small cabin where they could stay while working on the main house. "It won't be much," he explained as they unloaded lumber, "but it'll be secure and keep the weather out." Catherine watched him work, his movements efficient and practiced. When she tried to help, he patiently showed her how to hold the tools, how to measure twice and cut once. By midday, they had the foundation laid out for the temporary cabin. As they paused for a simple lunch of bread and jerky, Catherine found herself curious about the man who had so easily stepped into her tragedy. "You seem to know a lot about building," she observed. Ethan took a drink from his canteen before answering. "My father was a carpenter before he took up ranching. He taught me the trade." He smiled at some memory. "Said a man should always have more than one way to make a living." "Wise advice," Catherine agreed. "My father was similar. Insisted I learn to run the books for the ranch, even though my brother was meant to inherit it." "And now it's yours," Ethan said. "What will you do with it once we've rebuilt?" The question caught her off guard. She had been so focused on immediate survival that the future seemed a distant concern. "I suppose I'll continue what my father started, raise cattle, maybe horses." She looked out over the land, rolling grassland with the silver ribbon of a creek cutting through it. "It's good land." "It is," Ethan agreed. "Worth fighting for." They worked until sunset, making good progress on the cabin. As they prepared to ride back to Ethan's ranch, Catherine noticed him scanning the horizon, his hand never far from his sidearm. "You're worried they'll come back," she said. "Just being cautious," he replied, helping her mount. "The Blackwoods aren't known for giving up easily." That night, after returning to Ethan's ranch, Catherine sat by the fire mending one of Mrs. Hollister's dresses to better fit her slimmer frame. Ethan cleaned his guns at the table, the familiar ritual seeming to soothe him. "Tell me about your family," he said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. Catherine's needle paused mid-stitch. "My father came west after the war between the states. He was from Virginia originally, but couldn't abide living under Northern rule. My mother followed him, though I think she never quite forgave him for bringing her to such a wild place." She smiled sadly. "She died of fever when I was 12. My brother James was 4 years older than me. He had just become engaged to Mary Simmons from town. They were to be married next month." Ethan's hands stilled on his work. "I'm sorry, Catherine, truly." "What about your family?" she asked, partly to move away from her own grief. "You mentioned losing your parents in a fire." He nodded, resuming his cleaning with methodical care. "My father brought us west from Pennsylvania when I was a boy, built a good life here. My mother was a schoolteacher, taught me to read Shakespeare and Dickens by lamplight." His voice held a gentle warmth when speaking of her. "After they died, I joined the army. Seemed the thing to do at the time. And now you're a rancher." "Trying to be," he said with a self-deprecating smile. "Still learning the trade, to be honest. Cattle are more complicated than horses." Catherine found herself returning his smile. "I could help with that. I grew up with cattle." "I might take you up on that offer," he replied, their eyes meeting across the room for a moment. Something electric passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits. Catherine looked away first, suddenly conscious of the impropriety of their arrangement, despite Ethan's continued insistence on sleeping in the barn. "We should turn in," Ethan said, apparently sensing her discomfort. "Another long day tomorrow." The next week fell into a pattern. Each morning they would ride to Catherine's property and work on the cabin. Ethan proved to be a skilled builder, and under his guidance, the small structure took shape quickly. By the 5th day, It had walls and a roof. By the seventh, a door that could be barred from inside and shuttered windows. During this time, Catherine learned more about the man who had come to her rescue. Ethan was thoughtful, often quiet but never distant. He had a dry sense of humor that emerged in unexpected moments, and a deep sense of justice that seemed to drive him. When she asked why he hadn't pursued the Blackwoods with Marshal Collins, his answer was simple: "Because you needed me here more." The simple declaration had warmed her in ways she wasn't ready to examine. On the 10th day, as they finished the interior of the cabin, installing a small cast iron stove Ethan had brought from town, a rider approached. Both of them tensed, reaching for weapons, but relaxed when they recognized Marshal Collins. "Progress looks good," he commented, dismounting and surveying their work. "Solid construction." "Should keep the weather out," Ethan agreed. "Any word on the Blackwoods?" Collins removed his hat, wiping sweat from his brow. "That's why I'm here. We've got a lead." One of their men got drunk in a saloon over in Riverton, started bragging. "They're camped in a box canyon about 20 miles north of here." Catherine's heart raced at the news. "Are you going after them?" "We are," Collins confirmed. "I've gathered 8 men I trust. With me and Tanner, that makes 10. He looked at Ethan. "Could use one more good man." Ethan glanced at Catherine, his expression conflicted. "When do you ride?" "Dawn tomorrow. Should be a 2-day operation." Catherine stepped forward. "He should go with you," she said firmly, though the thought of Ethan facing the Blackwoods filled her with dread. "My family deserves justice." Ethan studied her face. "Are you sure? The cabin's finished, but you'd be alone." "I have my guns," she reminded him, "and I can bar the door. Besides, the sooner the Blackwoods are brought to justice, the sooner we can all sleep easier." After a moment's consideration, Ethan nodded. "All right, I'll ride with you, Marshal." "Good man," Collins said. "Meet us at the sheriff's office at first light." He tipped his hat to Catherine. "Madam." After the marshal rode away, Catherine and Ethan finished their work in relative silence. The cabin was simple but functional: one main room with the stove for heating and cooking, a small table and chairs salvaged from the ruins of her home, and a narrow bed in the corner. "It's not much," Ethan said apologetically as they stood back to survey their work, "but it'll do until we can build the main house." "It's perfect," Catherine insisted. "I can't thank you enough." As they prepared to leave for what might be the last night at Ethan's ranch, Catherine felt a growing unease. The thought of Ethan riding out to face the men who had murdered her family filled her with conflicting emotions: gratitude, worry, and something deeper she wasn't ready to name. That evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, the tension between them was palpable. Ethan cleaned his rifle with extra care, checking and rechecking the action. "Please be careful tomorrow," Catherine said finally, breaking the silence. Ethan looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "I will. Collins is a good man, and he wouldn't lead us into an ambush." "Still," she persisted, "the Blackwoods are dangerous. They killed my father and brother without hesitation." "Which is why they need to be stopped," Ethan replied gently. "For your family and for anyone else they might harm." Catherine nodded, fighting back unexpected tears. In just 10 days, this man had become important to her in ways she hadn't anticipated. The thought of losing him now was unbearable. "I should go check on the horses," Ethan said, standing and setting his rifle aside. "Ethan," Catherine called as he reached the door. When he turned, she crossed the room to him, acting on impulse. Standing on tiptoe, she placed a kiss on his cheek. "For luck," she whispered. His eyes darkened, and for a moment she thought he might pull her closer. Instead, he touched her cheek with gentle fingers. "I'll come back," he promised. "We still have a stone house to build." Dawn found Catherine standing outside the cabin, watching as Ethan saddled his horse. He had insisted on escorting her back to her property before joining the posse, despite her assurances that she could make the short ride alone. "I'll feel better knowing you're safe behind that door," he said, tightening the cinch on his saddle. "Besides, I've packed some extra supplies for you." He indicated the bulging saddlebags. The ride to her property was conducted mostly in silence, both of them aware of the danger Ethan would soon face. At the cabin, he helped her unload the supplies, enough food for several days, extra ammunition, and a small stack of books. "I thought you might want something to read," he explained, almost shyly. "They were my mother's favorites." Catherine ran her fingers over the worn spines: Jane Austen, the Bronte sisters, and, surprisingly, a volume of Walt Whitman's poetry. "Thank you," she said, touched by his thoughtfulness. As Ethan prepared to leave, he hesitated. "Bar the door after me," he instructed. "Don't open it unless you're certain it's friendly." "I will," she promised. "Ethan, come back safely." He looked at her for a long moment, as though memorizing her face. Then, in a movement so quick she hardly had time to react, he bent and pressed his lips to hers, a brief, warm contact that ended almost before she registered it. "Something to come back for," he murmured, then mounted his horse and rode away, leaving Catherine touching her lips in wonder. True to her word, Catherine barred the door after Ethan left. The cabin, which had seemed cozy with him in it, now felt confining and empty. She tried to occupy herself with arranging her few possessions, reading, and planning what crops might be planted come spring. But her thoughts continually returned to Ethan and the posse. Night fell, and with it came a rising wind that moaned around the eaves of the cabin. Catherine kept her rifle close as she prepared a simple supper, starting at every creak and groan of the new structure. After eating, she tried to lose herself in Pride and Prejudice, but found she couldn't concentrate. Instead, she found herself drawn to the Whitman volume. Opening to a random page, her eyes fell upon the lines. "I am he that walks with the tender and growing night. I call to the earth and see half held by the night." The beauty of the words touched something in her soul, and she wondered if Ethan had read these same passages, if his mother had read them to him as a boy. A sudden noise outside snapped her attention back to the present. Setting the book aside, she reached for her rifle, straining to hear over the wind. It came again, the distinct sound of footsteps on the porch. "Who's there?" she called, her voice steadier than she felt. "It's me, Miss Walker, Deputy Miller." The voice was familiar, one of Sheriff Tanner's men. Still cautious, Catherine approached the door. "What brings you out here so late, Deputy?" "Sheriff asked me to check on you, madam. Make sure you're all right with Everett gone." It seemed reasonable enough, but something in his tone made Catherine hesitate. "That's very thoughtful, but I'm fine." "Please thank the sheriff for his concern." "Could I trouble you for some water, madam? It's a long ride back to town." Catherine's hand hovered over the bar. Deputy Miller was known in town, had been with the sheriff for years, and yet— "There's a pump by the ruins of the main house," she said. "You're welcome to use it." A moment of silence followed, then a chuckle that raised the hair on her arms. "Now, Miss Walker, that's not very hospitable. Why don't you open up so we can talk proper?" Catherine raised her rifle, aiming at the door. "I think you should leave, Deputy." The response was immediate and chilling, the sound of a gun being cocked. "Open the door, or I'll open it for you." Fear surged through Catherine, but with it came a cold clarity. "Deputy Miller is with the posse," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "So whoever you are, you're not welcome here." A harsh laugh answered her. "Smart girl, but it won't help you. The Blackwoods want this land and they're going to get it. Your boyfriend and the others are walking into a trap. By dawn, there won't be anyone left to protect you." Catherine's blood ran cold at his words. "You're lying." "Am I?" Hank Blackwood's smarter than that fool Marshall gives him credit for. We knew they were coming. Left just enough men behind to make them think they found our camp while the rest of us." He paused meaningfully. "Well, let's just say we're taking care of loose ends." Catherine's mind raced. If what he said was true, Ethan and the others were in grave danger. But first, she had to deal with the immediate threat. "If you want me, you'll have to come through this door," she called. "And I promise, the first man through gets a bullet." "Have it your way," the voice replied. "But you're outnumbered, little lady. There's 4 of us here and we've got all night." As if to punctuate his words, a shot rang out, splintering the wood beside the door. Catherine ducked, heart pounding. 4 against 1, those weren't odds she could overcome by force. Think, she commanded herself. What would Ethan do? The answer came to her like a flash of inspiration. Moving quickly, she gathered what she needed: a lamp, matches, and a rag. If the Blackwoods wanted to destroy homes with fire, she'd show them how it felt. Working swiftly, she fashioned a makeshift firebomb from the lamp oil. Then, moving to the window on the side of the cabin away from where the men seemed to be gathered, she eased the shutter open. Drawing a deep breath, she lit the rag, counted to 3, and threw the lamp as far as she could toward the old barn, which still stood about 30 yards from the cabin. The lamp shattered, flames erupting immediately. Dry wood caught quickly, and within moments, the abandoned barn was ablaze, casting an orange glow across the property. Shouts of alarm came from the front of the cabin. Catherine used the distraction to grab her rifle, the book of poetry Ethan had given her, and a small pack with essential supplies. Moving to the back window, which Ethan had designed to be large enough for escape in just such an emergency, she pushed it open and slipped out into the night. Keeping low, she skirted around the burning barn, using the confusion it created to make her way to the creek that ran through the property. The same creek where she had been washing linens the night her family was killed, the reason she had survived when they had not. Following the creek bed, which provided both cover and a clear path, Catherine moved away from the cabin. Behind her, she heard angry shouts as the Blackwood men realized she had escaped. A shot rang out, but it wasn't aimed at her. They were firing blindly, hoping to scare her into revealing her position. Catherine continued moving, her mind fixed on one goal. She had to warn Ethan and the posse. If the Blackwoods had set a trap, they were riding into danger unawares. But how could she get to them in time? The answer presented itself as she rounded a bend in the creek. Tethered to a tree, partially hidden by brush, was a horse presumably belonging to one of the Blackwood men. Catherine approached cautiously, speaking softly to avoid startling the animal. It was a sturdy bay gelding, saddled and ready to ride. With a silent prayer of thanks, she mounted, orienting herself by the stars. The marshal had said the Blackwoods were camped in a box canyon north of her property. If she rode hard through the night, she might reach Ethan and the others before they rode into the trap. The night was clear but cold, the wind cutting through her coat as she pushed the horse to a gallop across open country. Catherine had grown up riding these lands, knew them as intimately as she knew her own face. Even in darkness, she could navigate by familiar landmarks: the lightning-struck oak that marked the boundary of Palmer's land to the west, the distinctive outcropping of rocks locals called the Sentinel that guarded the approach to the foothills. As she rode, Catherine's mind returned to Ethan, his quiet strength, his unexpected gentleness, the brief kiss that had left her yearning for more. In just days, he had become essential to her in ways she had never anticipated. The thought of losing him now, when they had barely begun whatever was growing between them, was unbearable. Dawn was breaking when Catherine finally spotted smoke rising from a campsite nestled at the mouth of a narrow canyon. Approaching cautiously, she dismounted and moved forward on foot, her rifle ready. If the Blackwoods had already sprung their trap, she might be walking into a massacre. Relief flooded her when she recognized Sheriff Tanner standing by a campfire, coffee pot in hand. Beyond him, she could see other men, including Marshal Collins, checking gear and saddling horses. They were preparing to move out. "Ethan," she whispered, scanning the camp. Where was he? Then she saw him, emerging from the trees with an armful of firewood. Catherine's heart leaped at the sight of him, whole and unharmed. "Ethan," she called, running forward. His head snapped up at the sound of her voice, logs tumbling from his arms as he saw her. "Catherine!" Disbelief and alarm warred on his face. "What are you doing here?" Before she could answer, Marshal Collins and Sheriff Tanner hurried over, equally shocked by her appearance. "Miss Walker," Collins said. "What's happened?" Catherine fought to catch her breath. "It's a trap," she gasped. "The Blackwoods knew you were coming. They left this camp as a decoy. Most of them doubled back. They came to my cabin last night." Ethan's face darkened with fury. "Are you all right? Did they hurt you?" "I'm fine," she assured him, touched by his immediate concern for her safety. "I escaped out the back window and stole one of their horses. But they said they left just enough men here to make you think you'd found their camp while the rest." She swallowed hard. "They planned to ambush you, probably on your way back." Marshal Collins cursed softly. "I should have known it was too easy. Hank Blackwood's not a man to let his guard down." "How many men came to the cabin?" Sheriff Tanner asked. "4 at least," Catherine replied, "but I got the impression there were more elsewhere." Ethan moved closer, his hand coming to rest protectively on her shoulder. "You rode all night to warn us," he said, his voice tight with emotion. Catherine nodded, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. The adrenaline that had carried her through the night was fading, leaving her limbs leaden. "I couldn't let you ride into their trap." Marshal Collins was already issuing orders, reorganizing their approach based on this new information. Sheriff Tanner moved to help, leaving Catherine and Ethan momentarily alone. "You could have been killed," Ethan said quietly, his eyes intense as they searched her face. "So could you," she replied simply. "I couldn't let that happen." Something shifted in his expression, then a softening, a surrender to what had been building between them since that first day amid the ashes of her home. His hand moved from her shoulder to cup her cheek. "Catherine Walker, you are the bravest woman I've ever known." Before she could respond, Marshal Collins called for Ethan. "We need to move out now. If they know we're here, we can't afford to wait." Ethan's jaw tightened, clearly torn between duty and his desire to ensure Catherine's safety. "You should stay here in camp," he said. "We'll leave 2 men with you." Catherine shook her head. "No, if you're going after the Blackwoods, I'm coming with you." When he began to protest, she cut him off. "They killed my family, Ethan. I have every right to see justice done." Marshal Collins, overhearing, looked to Sheriff Tanner, who shrugged. "She's got grit, I'll give her that, and an extra gun might come in handy." "Fine," Ethan relented, though his expression remained worried. "But you stay behind me, and if things go wrong, you ride hard in the opposite direction. Promise me." Catherine nodded, though she had no intention of abandoning him or the others if trouble arose. Some promises, she reasoned, were made to be broken when circumstances demanded it. The posse reorganized quickly, changing their approach based on Catherine's information. Instead of charging directly into the canyon as planned, they split into 2 groups. One, led by Marshal Collins, would circle around to approach from the higher ground above, while Sheriff Tanner would lead the second group, including Catherine and Ethan, to approach from the east, cutting off the most likely escape route. As they rode out, Catherine found herself alongside Ethan, their horses moving at a matched pace. "I'm sorry about the cabin," she said. After all your work, it might be destroyed by now. Ethan's expression was grim but determined. Buildings can be rebuilt. You can't be replaced. His simple statement warmed her despite the chill morning air. They rode in companionable silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts as they approached what might well be a decisive confrontation. The plan worked better than any of them could have hoped. Approaching from two directions, the posse caught the remaining Blackwood men completely off guard. There were only 6 of them in the camp, clearly left behind, as Catherine had said, to make it appear that the gang was still there while the main force was elsewhere. The fight was brief but intense. 2 of the Blackwood men surrendered immediately, throwing down their weapons when confronted with superior numbers. 3 others tried to shoot their way out, resulting in a brief but fierce exchange of gunfire. When it ended, 2 of the outlaws lay dead, and the 3rd was wounded but alive. The 6th man, who turned out to be Hank Blackwood's younger brother, Jake, attempted to escape on horseback, racing toward a narrow ravine that might have offered a path to freedom. It was Catherine, positioned on higher ground with her rifle, who took the shot that brought down his horse, sending Jake Blackwood tumbling to the ground, where Sheriff Tanner quickly apprehended him. "Nice shooting," Ethan said as he rode up to join her, his expression a mixture of pride and concern. "Are you all right?" Catherine lowered her rifle, hands shaking slightly with the aftermath of adrenaline. "Yes, did we get them all?" "The ones that were here," he confirmed. "But the main group, including Hank Blackwood himself, are still out there." His expression darkened. "Possibly at your property right now." Marshal Collins joined them, his hat pushed back on his head. "Jake Blackwood's talking. Says his brother took most of the gang to burn you out, Miss Walker. When you didn't die in the first fire, Hank took it personal." "We need to get back there," Catherine said, fear clutching at her heart. Not for herself this time, but for what little remained of her family's legacy. "We will," Collins assured her. "Sheriff Tanner's taking the prisoners to town with 3 men. The rest of us will head to your property immediately." The ride back to Catherine's land was tense, each of them aware that they might be riding into another ambush. As they approached, smoke was visible on the horizon, dark and thick, signaling that something substantial was burning. "No," Catherine whispered, urging her horse faster. What they found was both better and worse than expected. The small cabin Ethan had built was indeed ablaze, beyond saving. But the Blackwood Gang was still there, engaged in a standoff with several neighboring ranchers who had seen the smoke and come to investigate. The arrival of Marshal Collins and his men shifted the balance immediately. Caught between 2 forces, Hank Blackwood and his remaining men found themselves surrounded. "It's over, Blackwood," Collins shouted. "Throw down your weapons." For a tense moment, it seemed Hank might choose to fight to the death. His face, visible even at a distance, was contorted with rage as he looked from the marshal to Catherine, who sat straight and proud on her borrowed horse, rifle ready. "That water belongs to me," he shouted. "Old man Walker stole it. My father owned this land legally," Catherine called back. "The only thief here is you, Blackwood." Perhaps it was the arrival of additional forces, or perhaps even Hank Blackwood knew when he was beaten. With a curse, he threw down his gun, his men following suit one by one. As Marshal Collins and the others moved in to disarm and secure the prisoners, Ethan rode to Catherine's side. "Are you all right?" She nodded, eyes fixed on the burning cabin. "It's just a building," she said, echoing his earlier words. "It can be rebuilt." His hand covered hers where it rested on her saddle horn. "Yes, it can. And this time, we'll build it of stone just like I promised." The aftermath of the confrontation kept them busy for hours. Statements had to be taken, prisoners secured, and the dead respectfully dealt with. By the time everything was settled, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across Catherine's land. The neighboring ranchers who had come to her aid offered her a place to stay, but it was Ethan's quiet invitation that she accepted. "Come home with me," he said simply. "We'll start fresh tomorrow." That night, back at Ethan's ranch, they sat closer than usual by the fire. The day's events had shifted something between them, breaking down the careful distance they had maintained. "You could have been killed," Ethan said softly, breaking a comfortable silence. Riding out alone in the night like that. Catherine looked up from the mending in her lap. She was repairing a tear in his shirt, a domesticity that felt both strange and right. "So could you, riding into their trap?" She set her needle down. "I couldn't let that happen." "Why?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Catherine met his gaze steadily. "Because in 10 days, you've become important to me, more important than I thought possible." Ethan moved then, crossing the space between them to kneel before her chair. Taking her hands in his, he looked up at her with an expression that made her heart race. "Catherine Walker, I've been falling in love with you since the moment I found you standing in the ashes of your home, too proud to cry, too strong to break." The simple declaration stole her breath. "Ethan." "You don't have to say anything," he assured her quickly. "I know it's soon and you've lost so much, but I wanted you to know where I stand. Whatever comes next, whatever you decide to do, I'm here. Not out of pity or obligation, but because there's nowhere else I'd rather be than building a life with you." Catherine freed one hand to touch his face, tracing the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. "I think I started falling in love with you when you promised to build me a house of stone," she admitted. "No one has ever fought for me the way you have." The kiss that followed was different from their first, not brief and uncertain, but deep and sure, a promise of things to come. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Ethan's eyes held a question. "Stay," Catherine whispered. "Don't go to the barn tonight." His expression softened with tenderness. "Are you sure?" In answer, she kissed him again, letting her actions speak where words seemed inadequate. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Jefferson, with Marshal Collins and Sheriff Tanner as witnesses. The Blackwoods, including Hank himself, were safely behind bars awaiting trial, charged with multiple counts of murder, arson, and attempted murder. With their reign of terror ended, the territory breathed a collective sigh of relief. True to his word, Ethan began work on a stone house for Catherine. Using limestone from a nearby quarry, he designed a structure that would endure for generations, solid, beautiful, and impervious to fire. Catherine worked alongside him, learning masonry as she had learned carpentry, their partnership extending to every aspect of their lives. They lived in Ethan's ranch house during the construction, which gave them time to properly court each other, despite the unconventional start to their relationship. Catherine discovered Ethan's fondness for poetry extended beyond Whitman. He could recite Tennyson and Longfellow from memory, a skill taught by his schoolteacher mother. In turn, Ethan learned that Catherine had a beautiful singing voice and a talent for making even the simplest meal feel like a feast. By the following spring, the stone house was taking shape on Catherine's land, their land now, as they had decided to combine their properties into one larger ranch. The main structure was complete enough to be inhabitable, though finishing touches would continue through the summer. On the day they moved in, Catherine stood in the doorway, marveling at what they had accomplished. The great room with its massive stone fireplace, the kitchen with windows positioned to catch the morning light, the bedrooms with space for children they both hoped would come. It was more than a house. It was the physical manifestation of Ethan's promise to her on that terrible day when she had lost everything. "What do you think?" Ethan asked, coming to stand behind her, his arms encircling her waist. Catherine leaned back against his chest, savoring the solid strength of him. "It's perfect," she said. "Everything I could have dreamed of and more." "There's still work to be done," he reminded her, always the perfectionist when it came to his craftsmanship. "Yes," she agreed, turning in his arms to face him. "A lifetime of work together." His smile was tender as he bent to kiss her. "Together," he echoed. "Always." As summer gave way to fall and fall to winter, the stone house proved its worth. Warm and secure against Montana's fierce weather, it sheltered them through blizzards that would have destroyed a lesser structure. By their first anniversary, Catherine was expecting their first child, a blessing that filled both of them with joyful anticipation. Their son, William James Everett, was born the following spring, a robust boy with his father's sandy hair and his mother's determined spirit. As Catherine nursed him by the fire in their stone house, Ethan often read aloud from the books his mother had loved, continuing a tradition that bound past to future. The years that followed brought more children, twin daughters, Sarah and Elizabeth, who arrived 2 years after William, and another son, Thomas, 3 years after that. Their family grew alongside their ranch, which prospered under their combined expertise. Catherine's knowledge of cattle complemented Ethan's skill with horses, creating an operation that became known throughout the territory for quality livestock. The Blackwoods received Justice Hank and his brother Jake were hanged for their crimes, while the lesser members of the gang received prison sentences commensurate with their involvement. Marshal Collins delivered the news personally, riding out to the stone house to share it with Catherine and Ethan. "It won't bring your family back," he acknowledged as they sat at the kitchen table, coffee steaming before them. "But at least they won't hurt anyone else." "That's something," Catherine agreed, bouncing young William on her knee. "And we've built something good here, something that honors my father's memory." Ethan's hand found hers on the table, squeezing gently. "Something that will last," he added, glancing around at the solid stone walls that surrounded them. As Jefferson grew from a frontier town into a proper city, Ethan and Catherine became respected figures in the community. Ethan served several terms on the town council, while Catherine helped establish the territory's first lending library, donating many of the books that had once belonged to Ethan's mother. Their children grew strong and capable, each finding their own path while maintaining deep roots in the land their parents had fought for. William, the eldest, showed Ethan's gift for building and expanded the ranch with innovative structures that combined beauty and function. The twins, different as night and day in temperament but united in their fierce intelligence, both became teachers, carrying on the legacy of the grandmother they had never met. Thomas, the youngest, inherited his mother's head for business and his father's calm demeanor, eventually taking over management of the ranch's expanding operations. Through it all, the stone house stood as a testament to a promise kept, the promise of a grieving man to a woman who had lost everything. On summer evenings, long after their children were grown with families of their own, Catherine and Ethan still sat together on the porch Ethan had added during their 10th year of marriage, watching the sun set over land that had witnessed both their greatest sorrows and their deepest joys. "Do you ever think about that day?" Catherine asked once, her hand still fitting perfectly in his despite the years that had etched lines on both their faces. "The day we met," Ethan nodded, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. "Often. It was the worst day of your life, but it led me to you. I've never been sure how to reconcile those two truths." Catherine leaned her head against his shoulder, a gesture as familiar to them as breathing. "I reconciled it long ago," she said softly. Some things must be broken before they can become what they're meant to be. Like stones for a house, Ethan mused. Broken from the earth, shaped by hand, fitted together to create something stronger than its parts. Exactly like that, Catherine agreed, smiling up at the man who had kept his word in every way that mattered. A house of stone, built to last forever. As twilight deepened around them, Ethan bent to kiss her, still tender, still full of wonder even after decades together. In the distance, a coyote called to its mate, a wild and lonely sound that only emphasized the warmth and security they had created together. Forever, Ethan echoed, his voice a promise renewed each day of their shared life. And beyond. The stone house still stands today, over a century after Ethan Everett built it for Catherine Walker. Though their descendants eventually sold the ranch, the house remains, solid and enduring, a monument to a love that, like the stones from which it was crafted, was shaped by fire, strengthened by adversity, and built to withstand the test of time.